Hare Om Namaha. Gokulananda, feel free to begin your questions.
What is the basis of the Hare Krishna movement?
The basis is Vedic and Vaishnav perfect authority.
Of those two, which is the most important?
By far, it's Vaishnav spiritual authority, which is automatically compatible with Vedic authority. You can consider Vaishnav authority to be a branch of Vedic authority, but the more accurate description is that it is the cream of Vedic authority because it is entirely transcendental.
What is Vaishnav spiritual authority?
It is the authority followed by adherents of Vedic philosophy, strictures, and practices. They hold Lord Vishnu to be the supreme controller over all other universal controllers. The word Vaishnava directly indicates Lord Vishnu, who is the prime creator of the universe. One who believes that Lord Vishnu is the supreme controller over all other created beings is known as a Vaishnava.
How do we then know what Lord Vishnu had given to these followers in terms of Vaishnava philosophy, stricture, and practice?
That knowledge is transmitted through Guru Parampara, the line of disciplic succession. It must be a Vaishnava Parampara in order for the knowledge to be bona fide, and it must also be unbroken in order for the teachings to be perfect.
Is the Hare Krishna movement connected to the Guru Parampara?
It is connected to the Guru Parampara coming from Madhvacharya many thousands of years ago, that specific line.
Since you say that specific line, is there more than one Guru Parampara?
According to the Padma Purana, there are 4 lines of disciplic succession operating in this age, and the Madhva Sampradaya is one of them.
What is a Sampradaya?
It is another name for a bona fide Vaishnav Guru Parampara. It can, in a generic sense, refer to any line of disciplic succession that either has a Vedic connection or allegedly has one. In other words, bogus Guru Paramparas are also referred to as Sampradayas, although they are illegitimate.
Is any Vedic Sampradaya, that is genuine, automatically a Vaishnava disciplic succession or Sampradaya?
Negative. The Vaishnav Sampradayas are the highest lines, and some other Vedic lines authorized by the Dharma Shastras are subordinate to them.
Does the Hare Krishna movement recognize Lord Vishnu as supreme? Does it have its own Sampradaya separate from the 4 Vaishnav Sampradayas?
Although this may be difficult initially to understand, it both does and does not.
Is that a contradiction?
It is an apparent contradiction. But once it is properly explained and assimilated, the apparent contradiction is resolved.
Are you able to resolve it?
Certainly. We begin with Madhvacharya on the human plane, although that sampradaya was begun previously by spiritual entities who are far superior to human beings. That is why the Madhva Sampradaya is sometimes referred to as the Brahma Madhva Sampradaya. Lord Brahma, the secondary creator of the universe, is the supra-human source of this specific Guru Parampara.
Am I right to presume that the Hare Krishna movement has a link to the Brahma Madhva Sampradaya?
You are. Yet the Hare Krishna movement, although linked to Madhvacharya, is specifically different from what became of another branch of that line previous to the Guru known as Madhavendra Puri. There was a split in the line before the manifestation of the Hare Krishna movement in the 15th century in India.
Is it important to know the details of that split?
It is not, because we are not at all concerned about that other branch.
Does that other branch have a name?
Affirmative. Its gurus and followers are known as Tattvavadis. They operate differently from the Hare Krishna movement. They do worship a form of Lord Krishna, however, although their practices, history, and rituals are not the same as what is commonly known as the Hare Krishna movement.
Is this why you said just earlier that the Hare Krishna movement both does and does not have a link to the Madhva Sampradaya?
Affirmative.
When did that second branch of the original Madhva Guru Parampara come into existence, and who was its leader?
As aforementioned, it came into existence in the late 15th century. It was inaugurated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself in the form of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. As such, since he manifested in the area of India known as Gaud, the name of this branch of the Madhva line is known as the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. It is also called the Hare Krishna movement.
So the Hare Krishna line is really a fifth Sampradaya?
Again, it both is and is not. It is not mentioned in the Padma Purana, but it does have that prominent link to the Madhva line. Its prominent link is the Supreme Lord himself, Lord Chaitanya.
Do the other Sampradayas, and even the Tattvavadis, recognize this fifth Sampradaya, or Guru Parampara, as being bona fide?
Some do, and some do not. Many, if not most, of the followers of the other lines, including the Tattvavadis, do not accept that Lord Chaitanya was a direct incarnation of the Supreme Lord Krishna in human form, posing as a devotee. The followers of the Hare Krishna movement do accept this, and they worship him as such.
Are those in the other lines who do not accept him as the Supreme Lord manifest as a devotee in human form, therefore offenders?
This is really an extraneous issue. There's no need to be a fanatic about it. They're worshiping Lord Vishnu or Lord Nrsimhadev or Lord Ramachandra or some other expansion. They're rightly situated in doing so. And again, the followers of the Tattvavadis worship Lord Krishna, as does one of the other lines. A follower of the Hare Krishna movement can be aware of all of this, but need not be very concerned about it.
Did any of the other lines request that the Hare Krishna movement, once it gained momentum both during and after Lord Chaitanya's appearance, prove that it was bona fide according to a Vaishnava standard?
That demand was made, and that demand was fulfilled by a later Acharya in the Guru Parampara named Baladev Vidyabhushana. He was a first-class scholar and empowered intellectual in Vaishnava philosophy, as well as a Sanskrit scholar. Under the order of higher authority, he compiled the Gaudiya interpretation of Vedanta philosophy, and it is known as the Govinda Pasya. This was a translation and commentary on Vedanta Sutra, which is considered the chief work of Vaishnava higher knowledge and logic. The Vedanta Sutra is the Vedic literature which confronts and removes all apparent philosophical contradictions. With the emergence of Govinda Pasya, the Madhva Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya secured standing amongst all the advanced devotees in the other lines, as well as similar recognition from Vedic followers who are not Vaishnavas but approve of the Vaishnava Guru Parampara.
The Hare Krishna movement was a phenomena of India and Southeast Asia for centuries. Everyone acknowledges that the chief philosophy of the subcontinent strongly tends to emphasize liberation from samsara in terms of merging into Brahman, which makes it very different from the theism of the West. Was Lord Chaitanya's philosophy different from this? Or does it advocate that we, as humans, are all ultimately and spiritually completely non-different from Brahman?
You're correct that the majority belief in the subcontinent is in the absolute non-difference of the liberated soul from the supreme absolute truth when he or she is free from all illusion. This philosophy is known as Advaita or Advaita Vedanta, complete and absolute oneness. There is a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra espousing this, and it was written by Shankaracharya, an incarnation of Lord Shiva. It is the most popular commentary in India and has been so for centuries. The Shankara Guru Parampara is predominant in that area of the world, and mostly it is also known as impersonal Mayavad philosophy there. It is not theistic, but is instead covertly atheistic. Lord Chaitanya and his disciples have always been and remain staunchly opposed to Mayavad impersonalism.
So the Hare Krishna movement is distinct and different from the dominant Vedanta philosophy of most yogis and Hindus in India?
It was and is very different. Although some of the Vedic literatures, such as most of the Upanishads, emphasize impersonal liberation beyond the Mahat Tattva, this liberation is known in Sanskrit as mukti. Lord Chaitanya's movement emphasizes devotional service and recognition of eternal subordination as the means to attain vimukti in the Godhead.
What is vimukti?
It is liberation in spiritual planets via spiritual form and activity, rather than the preliminary liberation attained by merging into the impersonal spiritual energy of the Godhead, which is the goal of all impersonalists and impersonalism.
As such, then the Hare Krishna movement is actually theistic?
It is a specific variety of theistic known as panentheism.
Does that differ from the theism of, say, Christianity?
It certainly does. Christian philosophy is monotheistic.
Pantheism is distinctly condemned by Christianity. It opposes pantheism, but still maintains that God only is everywhere and controlling everything directly, as he fights satanic influence in such control. Is panentheism a form of pantheism?
It is not. Pantheism says that all material things constitute what is God. It does not recognize any theism transcendental to material nature. This is non-Vedic, and it is not the philosophy of Vaishnavism.
Can panentheism be described or defined?
Certainly. It is the perfect philosophy that the Supreme, or the Supreme Controller, delegates the operation of the material world to millions of demigods, all of whom serve him in that way. He, the Supreme Controller, oversees and permits all that transpires, but rarely interferes with their decisions and managerial powers. He is within everything in this way, but although aware of everything in every sphere, he does not actuate anything but simply witnesses. This is the case except for rare interference wherein he overrides a decision by a demigod. Monotheism, although obviously theistic, is distinctly different from this.
Did Lord Chaitanya produce a detailed explanation of his philosophy?
He did not. His direct and later disciples, however, most certainly did.
Is it true that each of the lines of succession mentioned in the Padma Purana, although they were all obviously Guru Paramparas representing panentheism, did each of them, compared to one another, also have a distinct and different emphasis of the perfect Vaishnava philosophy?
Affirmative. And it was never Advaita Vedanta.
Are those Sanskrit names for the different philosophical emphases?
Affirmative. The Madhvacharya line is known as Dvaita.
Is that also what the Guru Parampara of the Chaitanya Sampradaya is called?
Actually, it has a different Sanskrit description from the Madhva line, although it shares the Dvaita perspective that the Jiva Tattva, living entities, are different from the Supreme Person or Supreme Controller.
What is that different Sanskrit description?
The Sanskrit description of Lord Chaitanya's line is Achintya Veda Veda Tattva, which means inconceivable distinction and oneness of the living entities with the absolute truth, the Supreme Controller.
Is it correct to presume that the power and momentum of the Hare Krishna movement started to become dominant during the lifetime of Lord Chaitanya?
Such was the case, but it was limited to the Indian subcontinent.
Did it wane after he disappeared?
Not immediately, because his disciples at that time were all very powerful, pure, and influential. However, in due course, it did wane.
Is it important to know those details?
They were not emphasized by the Guru who brought the Hare Krishna movement to the West. They are important if you are interested in them.
Who was that Guru?
That Guru was His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. He decided to launch the Hare Krishna movement first in the United States.
When did he bring the Hare Krishna movement to the West?
In 1965, although the Hare Krishna movement here did not actually begin to take form with initiated disciples until 1966.
Why did it take so long for a Guru, one who was part of the Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, to come to the West?
Vaishnavism is very different from Western religion and mentality. Almost everything about it opposes the Western adventure. The predominant theism of the West, as practiced in American Europe, is also not compatible with Vaishnavism. Acceptance of Vaishnavism requires an individual to be situated in the mode of goodness, but the entire West, with very rare exceptions, is populated by humans who are situated in the lower modes of passion and ignorance. Pure Vaishnavism not only would not appeal to them, but they would be spontaneously against it.
It took 5 centuries for a Guru to bring the philosophy of Gaudiya Vaishnavism to America. Was there something different or special in the mid-20th century which led to this unprecedented breakthrough?
Not in India, but in America, certainly. It was the so-called Age of Aquarius, which actually has no astrological meaning in reality, but that's besides the point. The hippie movement contained a slice of followers who were, to greater or lesser degrees, interested in Eastern philosophy and transcendence. It was a very small slice of the hippie movement, but this subgroup of that movement in general was open to radical detachment and some of the lifestyle of the East. This cracked open the door for Gaudiya Vaishnavism to be introduced in the West, and Prabhupada chose to introduce it in the United States of America in New York City.
How important were the hippies to the spread of Prabhupada's message?
The vast majority of them were not at all inclined to it, not inclined to it in general, to its paradigm, or even to its terminology, except for some general concepts such as karma and the white light, which were also shared by all the gurus who came to America from India. The basis of the hippie movement was a combination of psychedelic drugs, rock message music, free love, and defiance of all Western political and religious dogma prevalent in the mid-60s through the early 70s. The hippies all led unregulated lifestyles, but some of them were very detached about material life in general, and that was helpful. All of the other disqualifications were, in and of themselves, not conducive to Vaishnavism, and some of them were completely counterproductive to even an inclination to become a Vaishnava. Nevertheless, there were special hippies who were Prabhupada's best potential customers, but they were in the minority of the hippie pseudo-religion. it was never all that unified at any time, despite the tune-out, tune-in, drop-out motto, which was the pulse of the peace and love movement.
You say hippie pseudo-religion. What is the way to best understand this?
That movement was inspired by a mix of previous historical forces, combined with the tremendous social pressures present in that brief epoch, particularly the Vietnam War. Renaissance energy was part of it, and turn-of-the-century Romanticism also was. The Beat movement was its immediate predecessor, but what is not well known is that the Dharvash Sahajiyas from India also were a subtle and covert influence, although much more difficult to trace out.
So the hippies in general were Sahajiyas?
Many of them were an unconscious third-order simulacrum of the Dharvashas, one of the 13 prominent Sahajiya groups in India.
Did this factor in as to how the Hare Krishna movement eventually played out?
It certainly did.
Can you explain that?
Eventually. Near the end of this Q&A, I shall offer that explanation.
Did Prabhupada's movement attract Americans and Europeans from all age groups and all walks of life?
In the beginning and for quite some time, it certainly did not. Hardly any of his initial disciples from the first years were even over 30 years old, and this was especially true in the first 2 years of his movement as it expanded. Again, the chief walk of life that was attracted was the hippie, but only he or she who had an interest in the occult, an interest in Eastern teaching, in transcendence, and in liberation from the fire and pangs of social entanglements and all the pressures intrinsic to it. Tattvamasi.
Since the hippie lifestyle was, in almost all ways, opposed to the Vaishnava lifestyle, did Prabhupada have to be liberal in implementing it for his followers, especially in the beginning years?
In some ways, he was quite liberal. However, in other ways, he certainly was not, especially in relation to those who dedicated themselves and joined his temples in the West.
Obviously, the 4 rules and regulations were difficult for most of these initial disciples, as well as converting to an austere and regulated lifestyle. Besides this conservative, in the spiritual, not the political sense, change in their lifestyles, was there any other factor in which Prabhupada was not liberal in his implementation of his Krishna-conscious movement?
Most definitely, there was one that was predominant. He commanded that he be worshipped as the direct emissary of the Supreme Lord. He commanded that he be adored on an opulent Vyasasan, that puja mantras be chanted to him specifically, and that the supplication of obeisances from all of his disciples to him be paid in his presence, such as whenever he was on his opulent seat, the Vyasasan, as well as when he first walked into any room in which his disciples were waiting for him, or when he arrived at an airport or any such similar circumstance.
That kind of supplication and worship was completely anathema to the hippies, who were saturated in an attitude of defiance and rebellion, as you mentioned. For those who came to him with some attraction to his particular brand of Eastern thought, how was this accepted by them?
If it was not accepted, they came and they quickly went. Prabhupada's liberality during his 11 years of physical manifestation should not be overemphasized. He was a my way or the highway Far East man. He commanded that he be worshipped as you would worship Lord Krishna if he was manifest to human vision. Prabhupada could make this demand because he was an Uttama Udhikari on the highest level of that status. He had the full range of all mystic powers, although he rarely displayed them. He was a Shaktyavesh avatar, which means that he was especially empowered by the Bhakti Shakti and this is an exceptionally rare attainment for any human being.
Did any of his Indian contemporaries receive this kind of worship?
I presume that you're referring to the other gurus who came to the West from either the subcontinent or from the Orient, representing some line of Mayavad, Hinduism, or Buddhism. None of them could command this kind of supplication, and none of them did. The majority of the hippies interested in transcendence, nirvana, mantras, liberation, and the white light went to them. Only the cream of the hippie crop went to Prabhupada. However, that should not be misinterpreted to mean that they became free from their former tendencies, even though they supplicated themselves in awe and reverence to his divine grace. That some of them did not become free from their former tendencies would be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt in the late 70s, beginning and especially in the spring of 1978.
I am more interested in the current situation of the Hare Krishna movement, although I certainly understand the importance of emphasizing, in your previous answers, the unbroken line of disciplic succession from Lord Chaitanya, which underpins ISKCON, or rather, which is supposed to underpin it. Before we move on, is there any other point of emphasis you wish to make about the Madhva Gaudiya Vaishnav Sampradaya, this particular Guru Parampara? Any such further explanation which, in effect, summarizes its integral and essential importance?
Affirmative. 2 points. First, the knowledge and process for realization, and this includes the means of production, namely producing pure devotees, must be passed down from guru to disciple, from generation to generation, both carefully and perfectly. Prabhupada often gave the example of a ripened fruit at the top of the mango tree being passed down carefully from branch to branch in order to be delivered perfectly to the person receiving it at the ground level. As you know, this was not done in the Hare Krishna movement, although to some extent it was done in its early years.
Agreed. What is that second point?
That second point is that although you can say that the Hare Krishna movement is theistic, and it is so, there is no need whatsoever to stress the religious aspect of it. It is far more of a cultural and philosophical movement than it is a religious movement. Understanding transcendence in the right way, in terms of its highest feature, does not require doting upon what the hoi polloi considers to be religion. There is monotheism, and it has its religious representation. There is Manichaeism, pantheism, polytheism, henotheism, universalism, and deism. Most of these have religious representations. For example, the early American founders were either Masons or deists or both. These are religious and dogmatic representations. But Hare Krishna followers do not accept any of them. We don't emphasize any of these religious isms as being important considerations whatsoever in order to make real spiritual advancement.
Are you able to clarify this explanation a bit further?
Certainly. We emphasize transcendental Vaishnava philosophy over such flawed religious concoctions, all of which are non-Vedic and diversionary misconceptions. They are all loaded with mistaken knowledge. The actual theistic conception is panentheism, the best summary of the absolute truth in the context of the relation of the jiva spirit soul and the Supreme Lord is achintya vedha veda tattva, as mentioned earlier. Overall, the real philosophy is parinamavad, which is superior and opposed to vivartavad or shunyavad. When the transcendental perspective is cultural and philosophical, but still entirely personal, then everything is understood properly. At that time, mundane religious antagonism, with all of its related horrible features and factors, is eliminated or eventually eliminated. Hare Krishna devotees, those who are not fanatics or sentimentalists, make this key discrimination and emphasis. They thus understand the essential importance of an unbroken Guru Parampara of the Gaudiya line in the right way.
Was Prabhupada's movement the same as Lord Chaitanya's movement?
In terms of substance, certainly. However, it was only a branch of the Chaitanya tree. It was a continuation of the Sampradaya as a branch, one which was meant primarily for creating transcendental personalists in the Western countries.
As a branch of the Supreme Absolute Truth, is it guaranteed to continue to exist, at least through the remainder of Chaitanya's golden age?
It has no such guarantee. The way things have gone down in the past 40 plus years, the odds are against it turning the corner. It will probably be scattered and wiped out completely the way things are going. It has been scattering badly since the late 70s.
Is this scattering due to its not having been passed down carefully after the disappearance of this branch's founder in late 1977?
Certainly that was a major factor. What transpired in the spring of 1978 during the zonal acharya imposition and takeover was the equivalent of a pseudo-spiritual smash and grab. It was tantamount to a death blow, but like many death blows, it took a while before it became self-evident to almost everyone that the ISKCON movement was being murdered.
What were the other factors to this degradation?
There are a plethora of them, but I shall simply name two. The emergence of the plainclothes pick in the mid-70s was a factor. The anti-intellectual pulse, which undergirded ISKCON culture throughout its entire existence, even before the zonal acharya catastrophe, was another. Philosophy was never emphasized in the movement. In most cases, Hare Krishna devotees did not even discuss philosophy amongst themselves. This movement was meant to represent spiritual science with realized Brahmins as its representatives, in conjunction with the higher intelligence prevalent in Vaishnava devotional culture. For all practical purposes, it came nowhere near attaining that basic plane. If it had been in place, it would have prevented the zonal acharya takeover in the late 70s.
Was stratification a major factor in its downward trajectory?
Absolutely. Its leaders converted Prabhupada into an inaccessible figurehead, especially during the last 3 years of his manifest physical presence. In the meantime, they secured the top 2 echelons of the institution via Machiavellian means in order to keep the rest of the movement's members at lower levels. They became little more, those lower levels, they became little more than gold-plated Shudras or quasi-Vaishyas out on the pick. Thus, the movement was almost exclusively made up of a hardcore, at-the-top manipulator class, completely controlling fanatics, sentimentalists, fools, and kickmes beneath them, all of whom were totally surrendered to these guys and without any access to genuine Vaishnava association. Fear, guilt, and doubt became prominent energies used by these rascal leaders in the guise of self-realized transcendentalists, which none of them were anywhere near close to being.
Was the true purpose of taking to Vaishnavism lost in all this?
Not only lost, but in most cases not even known. The purpose of joining any bona fide branch of the Hare Krishna movement is to become a siddha. S-I-D-D-H-I. Siddha. Perfection, while still in a human body, and this is known as Jivan Mukta. This was, as just mentioned, forgotten or unknown, or worse yet, considered unattainable. The movement's heavy-handed leaders were thought to be automatically blessed and empowered, although such was never the case. Another way of saying the same thing is that they were never the spiritual experts they pretended to be. Due to the institutional arrangement they created, which became more unauthorized even as Prabhupada was still physically present, it became apparent that their expertise was in the matter only of controlling all the bewildered neophytes under their institutional hammerlock and cult stratification.
You mentioned the goal as a human was to become Jivan Mukta. Is this the same as Mukta Jiva? Whether it is so or not, is Prabhupada a Mukta Jiva?
They are not the same. The Jivan Mukta is still embodied. The Mukta Jiva is not. Narada Muni is an example of a Mukta Jiva. Prabhupada is also available now that way for his devotees, especially at the time of their deaths.
Although we skipped over it so far, was the creation of the Governing Body Commission in 1970 meant to ensure that none of this deviation, depredation, depravity, and decadence could possibly transpire?
Certainly, that was integral to its particulars. Paradoxically, ironically, and tragically, it facilitated the zonal acharya imposition, and when that cratered, the collegiate compromise of the mid-80s.
Didn't the zonal acharya imposition minimize the power of the GBC?
It rather drastically minimized the power of the commissioners who were not recognized as Diksha Gurus and did not receive exclusive zones from the GBC. All 11 of the great pretenders were governing body commissioners, so their powers were greatly enhanced. They also managed to create an Acharya board within the GBC, which basically granted them immunity from all GBC decisions that would have otherwise negatively impacted them. Yet GBC fingerprints are all over the creation of the zonal Acharya imposition. Without GBC imprimatur, the scam could not have been pulled off for all the time that it did for those 8 years it overlorded everybody before it finally cratered.
Does the GBC have an egregor?
When it was functioning under the direction of Prabhupada and legislating according to his wishes, it did not. It was linked to Prabhupada's branch of the Sampradaya during that time. Any material egregor, and they are all astral and occult in nature, has no such link. When it deviated, it became the vitiated GBC. An egregor for it was then created, and that egregor controlled all of its members. It is likely that none of its members realized this, being overconfident as they were that they were the doers. That overconfidence was buttressed by the fact that they took complete control over virtually everybody in the movement so easily.
Is it the right conception to assume that GBC power was subordinate to the zonals during the period of their regime?
Affirmative. For all practical purposes, the 11 imitators of Uttama Adhikari, the princes of their individual zones, and initial members of the unauthorized Acharya board, rendered GBC power subordinate to them as a group. However, when Guru scandals surfaced, and 3 of them did early on, individual gurus were chastised by the GBC to greater or lesser extents. This was only because the other gurus not implicated in the gross scandals cooperated in order to implement those punishments to TKG, Hansaduta, and Jayatirtha, who were jeopardizing the whole pretense of the zonal imposition by their outrages.
Weren't some of the other governing commissioners, those who were not recognized as Diksha Gurus in given zones, demanding similar status?
That is accurate history. Swarup Damodar, who was the only dissenting voice in the creation of the zonal Acharya imposition on the GBC, paradoxically lobbied hard in Atlanta to be recognized also as a Diksha Guru in the spring of 1978. Others did as well. One sannyasi, an outsider when it came to the GBC, and never a member of it and hated by it, declared himself a Diksha Guru immediately. He already had a significant number of disciples, and he awarded himself the title of Prabhupada. Yet, it took many years before the GBC approved the expansion of Diksha Gurus by voting them in as such. This required a watering down of the zonal boundaries, obviously, and none of the first 11 gurus were keen on giving up their share of the worldwide pie. Of course, some territory opened up when Jayatirtha crossed the river to join Swami B.R. Sridhar of Gaudiya Math, and Hansudutta was de facto excommunicated in May of 1983.
Requiring curtailment of their powers, even though temporary for TKG and very temporary for Hansudutta, how did the GBC rationalize Uttama Adhikaris engaging in scandalous activities and sexual fall-downs?
It claimed that the disciples of these new gurus should see that their spiritual master had become sick, that he needed treatment, and would certainly get healthy in due course of time, although that rationalization didn't pan out very well. Also, during this period in general, a book entitled Guru Reform Notebook was penned by one of the original 11 great pretenders himself, one of the two chief scribes of the fabricated institution.
Once this colossal hoax went down, did ISKCON get converted into something else, or did it continue to purely exist despite all the flotsam covering it?
An astute question. Beginning in 1974, ISKCON existed in a compromised way to some extent, even while Prabhupada was still physically manifest. Corporate ISKCON has obviously existed everywhere since 1966, but somewhat gradually and insidiously another creeper came into existence in the movement. It was disguised as being ISKCON, as being Prabhupada's branch, but it was actually engaged in checking and strangling the real thing. This was the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation, which came to complete dominance in the spring of 1978. There is an argument to be made that it killed the ISKCON movement, although not immediately via that zonal acharya death blow.
Does Prabhupada's branch of the Hare Krishna movement still exist?
As an international institution functioning according to his directives and wishes, it does not. His teachings still exist, although they are being attacked to some extent by book changes, beginning with the Liechtenstein Gita in 1983, as well as the bogus commentaries to the 10th, 11th, and 12th canto of the Bhagavad by the other scribe. In summary, his branch is now hanging on by a thread. It is in grave danger of being completely scattered and lost in the near or intermediate future.
Were the second and later waves of GBC-approved gurus also taking Uttama Adhikari worship? Were they being given pranam mantras and their pictures also worshipped on the altars?
Affirmative. The first transformation of the movement was the zonal imposition, which was modified when the number of gurus were expanded. Yet all such gurus in good standing with the movement, with the GBC, were to be seen and worshipped by their disciples as Uttama Adhikaris. Altar desecration expanded, and the group psychosis continued for quite some time. Some of the first echelon men who bellyached eventually got over, but that was no solution at all. They then became integral to the problem and just as implicated and liable for condemnation.
Due to the exposure of egregious behavior on the part of some of the more audacious men of that first wave of high-flying gurus, Was the unauthorized pretension put into jeopardy? And related to this question, what was the root of all that defiant behavior in the first place?
The root was discussed earlier in our Q&A. It was the fact that their real faces were coming out. They had not changed their characters. Their superficial pretenses were no longer able to hide their causal and astral conditioning. In other words, at heart, they were still hippies, and the blatant defiance of Prabhupada's orders manifested in the form of a self-apotheosis, which was not a rare manifestation amongst the most egregious players in the hippie religion. However, as stated by Hansaduta directly to your host speaker in the late 80s on the front deck of the Mount Kailash property in Northern California, quote, "We went way too far, and we couldn't pull it off," unquote. Too many of them went outside the lines, created scandals, and their affairs with concubine disciples became exposed. That finally provoked many questions, which should have been asked by everybody no later than April of 1978, but weren't. It put the whole Mahabhagavat worship regime in jeopardy, eventually cratering it. This transpired in no small part due to the powerful position papers of Ravindra Swarup, who let it be known, whenever he had the opportunity to do so, that he was never a hippie.
What to do now?
Return to square one, that's what. So-called ISKCON is too corrupt and contaminated to do anything close to this, so it should be abandoned to its own devices. If the GBC had the stones to follow the path of the Politburo, then so-called ISKCON could be given some reconsideration. Maybe. Neomut must be avoided by all means. It has no connection to Prabhupada's branch of the Chaitanya tree. It is nothing more than Saturday's child of Gaudiya Mutt, which Prabhupada has specifically labeled as asara, or useless. The Ritviks are Prabhupada-centered, granted, but in the wrong way. They must be made to see that their heresy can never usher in the rejuvenated manifestation of the real golden age of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The colossal hoax, known as the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation, is a pseudo-spiritual scam. The two Upasampradayas that have some reflected resemblance to being part of Prabhupada's branch of the Guru Parampara, and that does not include Neomut, must acknowledge that neither bogus gurus nor bogus initiation processes can be transmitters of genuine initiation by the Bhakti-Lata Bij to and for any of the unfortunates who have accepted such ceremonial pretenses. They are all improperly initiated, and they need to wake up to this stark and painful fact. They need to free themselves from all institutional delusions and take necessary steps to get back to the actual Vaishnav culture, the actual philosophy, the actual process, and recognize the real history of what went down and why before it's too late. Sadeva Samya